The evening my wife Devon announced her pregnancy was supposed to be a simple romantic dinner. It wasn't just the candlelit ambience or her glowing demeanor that caught me off guard, it was the announcement itself. The words, "I'm pregnant," hung in the air, and I was dumbfounded. Not because I didn't know how to react, but because it was impossible. I had undergone a vasectomy years ago during my first marriage. Though I smiled and played along, my mind raced. This revelation couldn't be brushed aside. The next few days were a blur of feigned excitement on my part while I quietly observed, collecting evidence to confirm my suspicions. Devon's pregnancy wasn't a miracle, it was a betrayal. And the pieces of the puzzle all pointed to Jeff, my best friend since childhood. Jeff had been going through a rough patch after his divorce earlier in the year. We'd known each other since grade school, and over the years, our friendship had grown into something akin to brotherhood. He was the best man at my wedding, as I had been at his. When his marriage crumbled and his ex-wife took their kids to Ontario, I didn't think twice about offering him a place to stay. But what started as a gesture of support evolved into a nightmare I never saw coming. Initially, Jeff's presence in our home was temporary. However, as the months dragged on, Devon suggested renovating our garage into a suite so he could have his own space. It seemed reasonable, and Jeff was grateful, even pitching in with the renovations. At the time, I didn't think twice about their growing camaraderie. Devon and I had always been secure in our relationship, and she had gone out of her way to make Jeff feel at home. Devon and I had met shortly after my amicable divorce from my first wife, Trish. While my marriage with Trish had been a good one, our lives gradually drifted in different directions. She had built a successful home organization business, and I remained deeply committed to my work in law enforcement, frequently traveling across Canada for training sessions. Despite our separation, Trish and I remained close friends, sharing holidays and co-parenting our 2 children, who were the lights of my life. Devon was unlike anyone I had ever met. Older, adventurous, and fiercely independent, she was a breath of fresh air at a time when I needed it most. We bonded over shared hobbies, riding motorcycles, hunting trips, and a shared zest for life. She had made it clear early on that she didn't want children of her own, which I found reassuring given my vasectomy. We married in an intimate backyard ceremony, and for a while, life felt perfect. But Jeff's extended stay began to change things. At first, it was little things, Devon and Jeff running errands together or grabbing lunch. Then it escalated. They started going to movies and concerts without me. At home, I noticed their interactions were too familiar, an arm graze here, a shared laugh there. Devon began talking about Jeff incessantly, and they exchanged late-night texts long after I had gone to bed. The once flirtatious spark in our relationship dimmed, replaced by a chasm I couldn't ignore. My suspicions deepened when Jeff gifted Devon a set of bath oils and massage products, one of which I noticed had been used. I hadn't touched it, but the distinct fragrance lingered on Jeff occasionally. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself, silently gathering evidence. Then came the bombshell. One night, Devon turned to me in bed and said she wanted a baby. I was floored. She had always been adamant about not wanting children, and I gently reminded her of our earlier understanding. But she was insistent, accusing me of denying her a chance to experience motherhood. Her sudden change of heart made no sense. My gut told me something was wrong. The next day, in an effort to play along, I relented. "Let's try for a baby," I said. Devon's joy was instantaneous, and she threw herself into our newfound project with enthusiasm. But a week later, when she presented me with a positive pregnancy test, I knew the truth. It wasn't mine. There was no way it could be. The following weeks were an exercise in restraint. I accompanied Devon to her first doctor's appointment, where the timeline confirmed she was 12 weeks along, long before our supposed attempts at conception. Devon feigned surprise, calling it a miracle, while I played the role of the ecstatic husband. Inside, I was boiling. I bided my time, knowing that confronting her without undeniable proof could backfire. But I noticed more alarming signs. At home, I caught Jeff touching Devon's stomach in what could only be described as an affectionate gesture. My suspicions were no longer just hunches, they were reality. Everything came to a head one morning when Devon left for work. With her out of the house, I packed up her belongings, loaded them into a trailer, and locked Jeff out of the garage suite. I had had enough. When Devon returned and found herself locked out, she was livid. Through the doorbell camera, I told her we were done. "I know the baby isn't mine," I said, watching her expression shift from anger to shock. Jeff showed up soon after, trying to defuse the situation, but I wasn't having it. I demanded a paternity test, telling them both that the truth would come out. Their protests were feeble compared to the evidence I had amassed. My house was no longer theirs to misuse, and I made it clear they needed to leave. After I locked them out, the fallout was immediate. Devon was a mess, calling, texting, and leaving tearful voicemails pleading for another chance. "You've got it all wrong," she insisted, her voice shaking with desperation. Jeff's messages, on the other hand, were more measured. He played the role of the concerned friend, urging me to calm down and talk things through. But I wasn't falling for it. Their deception had been months in the making, and no amount of sweet talking would undo the damage. I focused my energy on securing my next steps. My first priority was protecting myself legally. I contacted a lawyer, determined to begin divorce proceedings immediately and to ensure I bore no responsibility for the unborn child. My lawyer advised me to request a paternity test to solidify my case, and I agreed. If Devon or Jeff thought I was bluffing, they were about to learn otherwise. The days that followed were tense. Devon didn't move her things out right away, she seemed to believe there was still room for reconciliation. But I stood firm. Through my lawyer, I made it clear that any further communication had to go through legal channels. Jeff, meanwhile, was oddly quiet. Maybe he thought Devon could convince me to back down, or maybe he was hoping I wouldn't push for the test. Either way, their silence only strengthened my resolve. When Devon finally agreed to the paternity test, I could tell she was nervous. Her bravado, the teary-eyed pleas and emotional appeals, had faded, replaced by a quiet unease. Jeff drove her to the appointment, and I imagined their car ride was filled with frantic whispers about what to do if the truth came out. But the results were inevitable. The child was Jeff's. Devon's confession came soon after. She showed up unannounced at my lawyer's office, her face streaked with tears, and begged to speak with me. Against my lawyer's advice, I agreed. I wanted to hear her explanation, not because I thought it would change anything, but because I needed to hear her admit it. Through sobs, Devon unraveled the entire story. The affair had started not long after Jeff moved into the garage suite. It began innocently, she claimed, long conversations about his divorce, shared meals, and moments of vulnerability. "We didn't mean for it to happen," she said, clutching a tissue. "But we just connected." I stayed silent, letting her ramble. She confessed they had been intimate for months, sneaking around when I was at work or on overnight shifts. Their relationship had deepened to the point where they couldn't stop, even though they knew it was wrong. When she found out she was pregnant, they panicked. Jeff convinced her to pass the baby off as mine, reasoning that my vasectomy would be their secret weapon. "You'd never know," she admitted Jeff had told her. Her excuses only fueled my anger. They had been planning to manipulate me, to make me unknowingly raise Jeff's child under my own roof. The audacity left me speechless. I let her finish her tirade, then simply said, "You've made your bed. Now lie in it." Jeff, predictably, was less forthcoming. When the paternity results came in, I confronted him in person at the station. He tried to deny it, even as the proof stared him in the face. "It's not what you think," he stammered. "Devon and we never meant to hurt you." But his words were hollow. Jeff had not only betrayed our friendship, he'd systematically dismantled the trust we'd built over decades. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than his feeble excuses ever could. With the paternity test results in hand, my lawyer moved quickly to finalize the divorce. Devon fought for spousal support, arguing that she had sacrificed her career to be a stepmom to my kids. But the court wasn't sympathetic, especially after I presented the mountain of evidence against her. She walked away with nothing. As for Jeff, his troubles were far from over. News of the affair spread quickly through our mutual friends and colleagues. His reputation took a massive hit, and his ex-wife, Amy, seized the opportunity to reopen their custody arrangement. Armed with evidence of his irresponsibility and his new financial obligations, Amy secured a significant increase in child support. Jeff was eventually transferred to a remote station in northern Canada, a move that I knew was orchestrated by a friend of mine who had heard about the betrayal. It was poetic justice. Devon followed him up north, presumably clinging to whatever was left of their toxic relationship. The two of them were now raising their child in isolation, far from the life they had tried to steal from me. I found solace in knowing they got what they deserved. But the silver lining in all of this was Trish. My ex-wife stepped in when I needed her most, offering unwavering support and reminding me of what really mattered. She helped me focus on my kids, who had been my rock through the storm. Together, we rebuilt a sense of normalcy, creating new routines and leaning on each other in ways I hadn't anticipated. With the divorce finalized and both Devon and Jeff out of my life, I was left to rebuild. The betrayal had been devastating, but it was also a wake-up call. My focus shifted entirely to my kids and creating a stable environment for them. They were the ones who had kept me going through the chaos, and now they were my top priority. Trish, as always, was a pillar of support. Despite the end of our romantic relationship years ago, she showed me the true meaning of loyalty and friendship. She stepped in to help with the kids whenever I needed it and offered me a safe space to vent when the weight of everything became too much. She never said, "I told you so," even though she had always been wary of how quickly Devon and I got together. Instead, she reminded me of my worth and encouraged me to focus on the good in my life. The transition wasn't easy. Devon had been a part of my kids' lives for years, and I had to navigate their confusion and questions about why she was suddenly gone. I was honest with them in an age-appropriate way, explaining that sometimes people make mistakes and that it was better for everyone to move on. They handled it better than I expected, and I think having Trish around helped. She was a constant in their lives, someone they could rely on no matter what. As for Jeff, his absence was a strange relief. Our friendship had been such a defining part of my life that I didn't realize how toxic it had become until he was gone. Looking back, there had been warning signs of his selfishness and inability to handle adversity with integrity, but I had ignored them, blinded by years of shared history. Now, with distance, I could see him for who he really was, a man who valued his own desires over the bonds of friendship and trust. Jeff's departure to northern Canada was more than just a transfer. It was an exile. Our mutual friends turned their backs on him, appalled by his actions. I didn't ask for their loyalty, but I was grateful for it. They saw through his manipulations and supported me in cutting ties completely. It was a clean break that allowed me to focus on the future without lingering reminders of the betrayal. Meanwhile, Devon seemed to vanish from our lives entirely. Apart from a few feeble attempts to contact me in the weeks following the divorce, she respected the boundaries I had set. I heard through the grapevine that life up north wasn't as idyllic as she and Jeff might have hoped. Raising a child in a remote, isolated town was challenging, and their relationship, built on lies and deceit, began to crack under the pressure. It was poetic justice, but by that point, I no longer cared. They were no longer my concern. Instead, I poured my energy into my kids and my career. I took a step back from some of the more demanding aspects of my job, opting for a role that allowed me to be home more often. Being present for my children became my main focus, and I was determined to make up for the time lost to the chaos of the past year. I also threw myself into my hobbies, hockey, hunting, and motorcycles, all things that brought me joy and reminded me of who I was before the betrayal. Through it all, I found myself reflecting on the importance of trust and integrity. The experience had shaken my faith in people, but it also taught me valuable lessons about resilience and the strength of true relationships. Trish and I grew closer than ever, not romantically, but as co-parents and friends. She reminded me that there were still good people in the world, people who would stand by you when everything fell apart. As time passed, I began to feel like myself again. The weight of the betrayal lifted, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the clarity it had brought me. Devon and Jeff had tried to manipulate me into raising a child that wasn't mine, but in the end, their deceit only freed me to live a more authentic life. The lies had been exposed, the damage repaired, and I was stronger for it. Now, I'm focused on the future. My kids are thriving, Trish and I have built a strong foundation of mutual respect and support, and I'm open to the possibility of finding love again, though I'll approach it with more caution this time. Life may have thrown me a curveball, but I've come out on the other side with my integrity intact and a renewed sense of purpose. At the end of the day, I'm reminded of something my father used to say: adversity doesn't define you, it reveals you. This ordeal revealed the cracks in my relationships, but it also revealed my strength, my priorities, and the people who truly mattered. I've learned to trust myself again, and for that, I'm grateful. Devon and Jeff are just a chapter in my story, a painful one, but not the end. My real story is the one I'm building now, day by day, with the people who truly love and support me. And that story? It's just beginning.